Hello, everyone. Welcome to the closing ceremony of this S4D4C final networking meeting. My name is Lorenzo Melchor, and I'm pleased to chair this first panel roundtable, which is going to focus on the future of EU science diplomacy with such a nice array of top speakers coming from different European institutions. For the last few days, we've discussed about the theory and practice of using science diplomacy for addressing global challenges. And now we'll focus entirely on the European Union as a global actor and how the future of EU science diplomacy looks like. First, as stated in the European Union's global strategy, there is a significant gap between the EU's presence and its international influence. This is confirmed by the Elcano Global Presence Index, which shows that the EU external projection is strongly concentrated in few facets and member states. The EU does indeed project a high volume of global presence compared with other countries or country groupings, and it's seen mainly as a major economic player with a soft power profile. Science and technology contribute to this soft power dimension, but it does so at a lesser extent than they do in other global actors, such as China. The EU's global strategy says we need a strong European Union like never before. It is what our citizens deserve and what the wider world expects. The European project, which has brought unprecedented peace, prosperity, and democracy, is being questioned. But how would the EU transform such a presence into power or influence? And how it can increase the importance or contribution of science and technology to this process? And second, COVID-19 has materialized itself as one of the greatest global challenges, bringing our healthcare systems almost to the brink of collapse and multiple geopolitical frictions into play, even within the EU and across all the stages of the pandemic. And let's not forget that climate change is still around. Multilateralism today is very different to what it was just a few years ago. So the question remains how the EU is planning to use science diplomacy for addressing global challenges. From S4D4C, we have published different recommendations for the EU in this regard, such as the Calling for a Systemic Change Policy Report or the new Protocol for Science Diplomacy. But to talk deeper about these aspects, we have invited 4 key stakeholders of EU science diplomacy. We've got with us today Martina Hartl, who is the chair of the Science Diplomacy Task Force of the Strategic Forum on International Cooperation, SFIC, for the Council of the European Union and the Council of Europe. We also have Gianmarco Muller, Science and Technology Advisor to the European External Action Service, Paulo Ferrão, President of the European Cooperation in Science and Technology, COST, and Adam Tyson, Senior Expert for the Strategy for International Cooperation in Science, Technology and Innovation at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. Thank you all for coming. And I'll go straight to the first question. What are, under your opinion, the current strengths and weaknesses of the European Union in the world scene and/or in the multilateral efforts to address global challenges? Martina, you want to start first?
Yes, thank you very much. And I hope you can hear me well. Thanks for inviting me. And just to quickly respond to that, I think that the EU is a well-trusted partner in science and research. And one can see that there is a strengthened focus on global challenges already since, I think, FP7, but now with Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, this is definitely increasing again. Just have a look at the last Green Deal call of Horizon 2020 that has a very specific focus already on one of these topics with a global dimension, and where also, for example, cooperation with Africa was specifically tackled. So also from an international cooperation perspective, very important. And I also think that the EU is already part of a number of multilateral fora and efforts, but I think this could still be strengthened and broadened also from a topic point of view. And I also think that there is huge potential via the European partnerships and the new missions in Horizon Europe to extend those to international partners and make use of them also from a science diplomacy perspective. I mean, cancer, water, soil, these are all topics of global relevance where we definitely need to interact with international partners.
Thank you, Martina. Gianmarco, what can you tell us about the strengths and weaknesses of the EU in the world scene?
Yes, thank you, Lorenzo. People complained yesterday that they couldn't recognize me without my bow tie, so I put my bow tie on. Now, on the strengths and the weaknesses, I think in both cases, the answer is the same. We have 27 member states. And of course, there's a weakness in the sense that it takes time to find compromises, to find common positions. And that's even more true for foreign and security policies, where we don't have qualified majority voting, but unanimity. So which means a country as small as Malta or Luxembourg could block decisions. So that's why it's very important to have these processes where we find common positions. And this, of course, takes time. It requires a lot of procedures. And this, of course, also gives a little bit of this technocratic image European institutions have in the public. But at the same time, this is the real strength of the European Union, because we are so diverse. You know, the motto is united in diversity. So we have all these different languages, these different cultures coming together, and where all these different ideas collide, that's where innovation is sparking, where new ideas coming out. And that's what really is also the strength of our scientific our research and innovation landscape. So I think there's also a big advantage here, and what actually glues us together are the European values, which we want to reflect, of course, in our foreign policies and also in science diplomacy. And the last remark I want to make, if you think about the European project, Europe after World War II, it stood for peace. It was about bringing the countries together that fought against each other in 2 world wars. And we have had 75 years of peace on the territory of the former European community, now European Union, which is unprecedented. After 1989, the European project was about freedom. It was about inspiring the countries in Eastern Europe and in Central Eastern Europe to fight for freedom. And of course, freedom is something we need to defend every day in what we do, the freedom, academic freedom, freedom of speech, of religion, and so on. And now the question is, what stands Europe for in the future? And I think this is what we see in the Green Deal. It is about becoming the first climate neutral continent. It is about showing that sustainability is not just a hollow concept, but actually it is doable. And we can do it while maintaining the well-being of the citizens. And science and technologies are the very foundation of that. And that's why it is so important to strengthen science diplomacy.
Thank you, Gianmarco. Your turn, Paulo.
Thank you so much. So I strongly believe that indeed Europe is a global soft power, so with a long history. But of course, current practice can be improved. So in my opinion, we clearly need to strengthen all the mechanisms to promote our transatlantic links, north and south, as well as to our neighborhood. And of course, science diplomacy is a great tool to do that. And according to my recent experience, for example, with the Atlantic International Research Center. Now, if we look at cost, so I think it is really one of those rare mechanisms which are dedicated to science cooperation and of course, diplomacy, being one of the longest running multi-level endeavors in Europe, while addressing all these challenges in a multilateral and intergovernmental approach, which I think is very important because indeed we are almost 30 countries. So the core business of COST has been to enable the creation of research and innovation networks called the COST actions. And I think that it is really critical to nourish and open the inclusive networks of excellence in all the scientific domains. And of course, to establish a platform where the people and ideas can grow and establish long-lasting global cooperations and global connections. So this is, of course, very critical, and COST has been contributing to the internationalization process of research and innovation. And all in all, I think that these mechanisms do the most important thing for science diplomacy. So they build trust, and they provide, of course, also the necessary safety, allowing to fail, and then offering a restart in a low risk and secure way. So this means, in my opinion, to create a fertile breeding ground for the development of the much needed new ideas, approaches, and solutions. So
thank you, Paulo. And Adam, what's under your view the strengths and weaknesses of the EU in the world scene?
Thank you very much indeed, Lorenzo. And first of all, congratulations for the organization of the conference this week. It really has been a great success and has really helped to shed a new light on science diplomacy. And I think that's important and will be a very valuable contribution also going forward. I mean, I very much agree, of course, with Jan, and his assessment of the difficulties of Europe in the world and the getting a single view out of 27 member states. And we shouldn't forget the associated countries are also part of our science system, of course, and that makes things even more complicated. But I think that there are two parts to your question: one about global challenges, and one about sort of strengths and weaknesses in the world. And when it comes to the global challenges, I think it's very clear that the overall focus of the EU on issues like climate change and biodiversity, bioeconomy, fairer societies, the digital transition, create a very, very positive framework in order for us to be able to concentrate and focus our efforts much more in the science and technology field, as well as in the associated economic fields, diplomatic fields as well. And that is helping us to create a much more joined up approach. I'm not saying that we're there yet, but we are on the way. Second, I mean, I think that another strength in terms of specifically research and innovation is our openness. Our openness to the world, openness to cooperation, the fact that we have a global reach with our research and innovation framework program, over 100 countries involved in the program. That's very important, and that this cooperation is based very strongly on shared values and principles. That's really very key for us, and the fact that we are approaching the global challenges using the values and principles as the basis of that interaction, so that we are underlining the shared importance of academic freedom, of the lack of political interference in the science itself, in the use of ethical standards, the fact that we want a human-centered approach to the digital transition, for example. These are all really strengths. Weaknesses are the flip side. Our openness also leaves us a little bit vulnerable sometimes, vulnerable to competition, to unfair practices, and we need to be a little bit more aware of that when we are dealing with partners around the world, and that is something that we will want to focus on in future.
Thank you, Adam. And now let's move to talk specifically about EU science diplomacy. You all are part or represent different EU institutions that are pushing forward through different means and approaches EU science diplomacy. Could you please summarize what your institutions have done to contribute to advance EU science diplomacy? And in your opinion, how do your endeavors relate to several discussions held in the conference, or perhaps recommendations that we have published in our S4D4C policy reports? Martina?
Yes, so within the Strategic Forum for International Cooperation, as you have rightly said, we have launched a specific task force on science diplomacy, and I think we have achieved so far three major things. First, we have issued a working paper where we have tried to set the scene for some key activities that we think should be implemented jointly between the EU and the member states. And I think some of these ideas have actually also been inspired by your Madrid declaration, and then also by the direct contact we had with the S4D4C project partners. So I think there we have really learned a lot, and my specific thanks there goes out to Anna Elosa, who is not only very active in S4D4C, but she's also a member of our task force. So we had this cross cooperation basically through all the time. The second big achievement we had is we actually really worked on specific ideas and topics that could be integrated in Horizon Europe in the different clusters to strengthen the science diplomacy element of Horizon Europe overall. And also for that, we have worked with the EU-funded projects on science diplomacy and with S4D4C specifically. And finally, we have launched a survey for the member states to get a feeling which countries already have a strategy on science diplomacy, who is already working on new initiatives, how is the awareness of who are the different actors in your countries. And one can see that the actors change from a purely governmental and academic side to also now involving more NGOs and new actors in the science diplomacy sphere. And I mean, for all of that, as I said, we had a very productive relationship with the S4D4C project. So I think it was an ideal timing for our group to be set up. So thank you.
We can tell that you've got that collaboration ongoing with our consortium, because you are able to pronounce the acronym without any mistake. Gianmarco, the European External Action Service, what is doing on science diplomacy?
Yes, well, although I'm a scientist, apparently I'm representing the diplomacy side of the equation here. So I've always had a strong feeling that science diplomacy has always been much more supply than demand side driven. You know, there's a lot of enthusiasm among scientists, among science organizations, science ministries, and so on. But the response from the demand side, from foreign ministries, for instance, was a bit slower in the uptake. And I think there's a big advantage here with the European External Action Service, because we are very young organizations. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and when you're young, it has the advantage that nobody tells you we've always been doing it like this. So actually there's a space also for experimentation. And of course, in a way, science has always been there, but I think the pandemic has shown that actually there's a much more stronger need to engage with science, also beyond kind of classical foreign and policy institutes, but also engaging, you know, with epidemiology and other areas. So there's a big need here, but I also see a big openness. Yeah, I mean, also from the top, from the High Representative, Mr. Borrell, who has been a former president of the European University Institute, so he knows academia very well. But I'm also seeing still reluctance in some parts. So I also hear voices, oh, we have already climate and water and energy diplomacy, and science is just another diplomacy which will take a chunk out of our budget. And I'm trying to tell people, look, science diplomacy is the basis for it. There is no water, climate, and energy diplomacy without science. So I think what is very important here is that the scientific community and the science diplomacy community helps us in this endeavor. And I think projects like S4D4C have delivered very important results in terms of training material, in terms of advancing the discussion, which I think is very helpful also to advance the discussion inside the External Action Service and inside national foreign ministries.
Thank you, Gianmarco. Paulo?
Thank you very much. So, well, science diplomacy is an important topic of our activities. So it builds on the international engagement of COST actions and their experience of working together with international peers. So I guess that it can be seen as a strong asset for European science diplomacy. So COST is really proud that, for example, the Science Diplomacy Task Force of the Strategic Forum on International Cooperation suggested to explore the science diplomacy potential of COST by explaining the involvement of the 38 members countries across Europe, including then countries of the Western Balkan and Turkey, as well as Israel as a cooperating member, or South Africa as a partner member. And for sure, the S4D4C project online knowledge resources also identified the role of COST. So, and also the COST Global Network Survey conducted the last autumn was asking specifically how science diplomacy was perceived by participants. And the majority of the respondents agreed that cost actions served as platforms for science diplomacy. And they mentioned examples like, and I think this is relevant, access and engagement in activities and bringing otherwise silent voices into the conversation. Trust building towards non-European countries, allowing to share critical information to advance science, improving relationships with North African countries, allowing to study difficult topics, such as, for example, Islamic legacy, and being capable of overcoming differences between Muslim and Christians. So all of these was, I think, taken care by cost actions. And of course, the most resonating part of the conference, I think, were the discussions on reinforcing science advice mechanisms. So the question of science diplomacy governance, understood as a multi-stakeholder and multilateral approach, as it has been emphasized, where of course we at COST are very committed and particularly experienced in reducing the silos and building communities. So congratulations for sure for the S4D4C conference so far. It has been great.
Thank you, Paulo. We now move to the DG research. Adam, can you enlighten us?
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think one of the things that the project has done is to broaden our understanding of science diplomacy. And I think that too often it's been seen as science-intensive countries reaching out to poorer neighbours and to building their capacity. And of course, that's part of it, but it's certainly not all of it. And I think it's really true to say that that almost everything that we do at a European Union level in the research and innovation field is science diplomacy in one form or another. It has diplomatic consequences if we decide to cooperate with a particular country, or if we decide not to. These are often scientific choices, but nevertheless have impacts on the relations that we have with a country overall. I think it's important to remember that even something like the association policy of Europe in terms of science and technology and the reaching out of its framework program is science diplomacy. And it's science diplomacy on a very big scale. This is a very important way of maintaining links with other countries, with supporting democratic processes, with supporting the idea that that scientific evidence should be the basis for policy, wherever you are, and we have a very big influence in that respect. Beyond that, of course, there are some very clear examples of activities that we're involved in the longer term and over the longer term, which are science diplomacy in a very classic sense. The work we do with Africa on food and nutrition, or on infectious diseases, on water in Central Asia, the work that we do with Latin America on research infrastructures, even the work that we do with Russia on mega science projects, working with their big research infrastructures, is clearly science diplomacy in a context where other forms of diplomacy, whether it's economic diplomacy or traditional diplomatic political contacts, are much more difficult. So we are involved throughout the program, but also in a much broader sense in our political links throughout the world.
Thank you, Adam. So we've talked about the global context, and we've talked about what you have done in the past and the present for EU science diplomacy. Let's talk now about the future. And what are your future plans to develop fully explicit science diplomacy activities? Do you find any special strength in using the term science diplomacy in a explicit way? And in general, how are they going to advance EU science diplomacy in general? Thank you. Martina, you've mentioned something about a survey.
Yes, and I think this is also my opportunity to answer one of the questions about whether we already have the results of the survey and whether this will be published. Well, we are currently analyzing the survey, and we were really happy that 19 countries have actually responded to the survey. So we are in the middle of analyzing it. And yes, we will then do a working paper of that. But besides that, also the Science Diplomacy Task Force will run until October of this year, and we still want to develop some specific recommendations out of the work for the national and for the EU level. And of course, we are also with interest waiting for the new strategy of the EU on the global approach to research, innovation, education, and youth, because we also hope that this will have a significant science diplomacy component that we could then also react on. And I wanted to say also this notion of explicit and not so explicit science diplomacy. I think it's true that in the context of international cooperation, we also do a lot of implicit science diplomacy. But I think that what the project and also basically the 3 projects that were funded have reached as an achievement is that we are more aware of also these implicit dimensions of science diplomacy than we were before, and also taking a critical reflections of what are the limits of science diplomacy. I mean, we all have seen that there was some kind of hype around, or still is a hype around, the science diplomacy topic. But I think with that also comes the fact that we should critically reflect that not all international cooperation de facto is science diplomacy, and that also when we implicitly use science diplomacy, that we really have to reflect on the impacts that has. And I think Adam has given a very good example when it comes to association in Horizon, for example. I mean, having someone as an explicit partner might discourage some others that are not. So you also have an impact in choosing your partners, and this is true on EU as well as on national level. So I think also this not so explicit science diplomacy activities need more reflection. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. We move now to Gianmarco and future plans at the EEAS.
Yes, I mean, explicit science diplomacy for me means how to make science diplomacy tangible for diplomats in their daily lives. And here I see, I think, 4 priorities on which I'm working. The first one is quite simply to raise the appetite for science, to show everything science is doing, and to kind of create spaces in which scientists and diplomats can interact. Think of course, training activities, think of lectures, think of fellowships in each other's camps. And I think here again, I think S4D4C has advanced a lot. So I think this is the first, which it creates the basis for the interaction. Second is looking into science advice. How do we actually procure science advice in the External Action Service? Do we use all the breadth of science? What is the diversity of our kind of evidence base? Are our advisory process robust? How can we engage also, of course, with evidence providers inside the Commission, the JRC, for instance, or of course the Horizon funded projects or European agencies, you name it. So this is, I think, a second big area. The third one is to look a little bit more into this aspect. How can we use science and technology better actually to advance our foreign policy goals? So again, making things tangible when, scientists keep the channel open between countries that have perhaps a difficult relationship. But we can look into many areas. I mean, take for instance, I mean, our research and innovation councils, which we have in the delegations, look at their roles and where they actually are. Should we have one in whatever, Cuba or whatever country where perhaps science could perhaps make really a difference, but diplomatic tools are limited. I mean, all these issues I think we should look at. And then finally, I think it's the kind of the outreach, the public aspect, and that of course includes the outreach to the science diplomacy community out there. So that's what I'm doing right now. But also, of course, in the host countries of our delegations, look into aspects, the networks of Marie Curie fellows and Jean Monnet program and all these programs which we have engage a lot with them. So look, how can we use this a bit more strategically? And of course, also our investments in broad. I mean, right now we are building extremely large telescope in Chile with more than €1 billion. So what does this mean for our engagement with communities there and with Latin America in general? So looking into these issues, I think these are more or less the 4 priorities I see.
Thank you, Gianmarco. Paulo, future plans.
Thank you very much. So we really want to continue to support science diplomacy as a topic and offer the cost actions as platforms to advance this domain, either implicitly as an added value stemming out of any collaboration, including the power of contributing to science-based policies as emphasized by Adam, or explicitly as a research topic to be focused in, and that both are possible. So the cost open call for the creation of research networks, the cost and actions are running with the next collection date of 29 October 2021. So the open call is inviting to submit cost action proposals contributing to the scientific, technological, economic and cultural or societal advancement. And multi- and interdisciplinary proposals are encouraged, particularly in this topic. So please go ahead. And of course, by continuing the close collaboration for integrating the Western Balkan countries' research communities into the ERA, the trusted collaboration with the cost near neighbor countries correspondent network, and of course, looking into existing and potential cooperation with Africa via their engagement into cost initiatives. So to extend and to deepen the knowledge about science diplomacy, we are planning to design and offer a training on science diplomacy to cost action participants. And I'm very happy to say this in this particular forum. And on the European scene, the cost program is of course an EU tool. So we are fully supported by the European Commission and we always are very grateful for that. And of course, we are intended to promote science cooperation, and we could be eventually more clearly perceived as an asset for science diplomacy by engaging closer with European actors, as well as EU science counselors in third countries. And I think this will be important, as it is, to spread the message in conferences like this. So I think these are my key message, and also, of course, the recognition for the value of this particular conference.
Thank you, Paulo. Now we move to Adam and DG Research.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, for the future, you know, Martina has already mentioned the fact that we're going to be presenting very soon a new strategy for our international engagement in the world on science and technology, along with education and youth. And one of the questions in the chat was asking me about you know, how my past responsibility on the education side has affected my work now. And of course, it makes it much easier for me to bring these two sides together. And I think that in this new strategy, you will see a more integrated approach, you know, in particular to the role of universities, both on the research and on the education side. And it's very important that these two things are brought together. And in that context, I want to say something about two things that we pose. The first, in terms of diplomacy, is that we want a space, a much bigger space, in which researchers from around the world can cooperate in a space which is secure for them, where they know that the values that they find are important are respected, where issues like intellectual property are protected, where they know that they are not going to be interfered with by governments, where they know that there are shared ethical approaches to the science. And we want to do that by starting an international dialogue precisely on the values and principles which underpin international science cooperation. That will be started, of course, within the EU, and there's a lot of work going on at the moment already on a pact for research and innovation in the European context. That will be the basis for our external engagement, but won't necessarily you know, be copied word for word, because we obviously need to adapt to our partner. Really strengthen our multilateral engagement in the world. And this is a point that you made at the beginning, Lorenzo, that multilateralism has changed enormously. We have to respond to that. We have to strengthen the multilateral organizations, not only in the science area, but including in the science area. And we need to engage multilaterally with partners in order to create a critical mass of science efforts, which are really focused on these global challenges. And in the past, our multilateral approaches have focused a little bit too much on the usual suspects, on the very strong science nations around the world, without bringing in partners who need to be with us in order to co-create the solutions. And that really is the approach that we want to develop now, is that to extend our global partnerships, to make sure that we are bringing in the people who are going to be affected by the solutions, who are struggling with the challenges, and who need to have shared solutions to these problems. Thank you.
Yes, the need for a renewed multilateralism. Actually, Gianmarco, you have published recently in the Science and Diplomacy Journal a mini essay comparing the multilateralism 5 years ago with the one of today. Could you just give us a couple of highlights about that article?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, multilateralism, of course, has been at its height 5 years ago. You think of everything that happened in 2015, but then has gone into one of its worst crises. And it's not just because of the former US administration, but we see it around the world in many aspects. And I think the pandemic also has shown that actually we need to make multilateral organizations fit for the systemic challenges of the 21st century. So I think, and diplomats at the end of the day are the ones that will negotiate this, and they will need the support from scientists. And I think science has advanced a lot in the last years by creating international structures. And then Adam already alluded to this. We now have the International Science Council, the International Network for Government Science Advice, and many others. And I think that's very good. So we have already structures that can respond to global cause. But I think we need to now reform multilateralism to make it fit, and they will need all the scientific advice they can get. So I think this is very important, because it's not just about conserving or restoring multilateralism. Actually, we need to reinvent it in many ways, because the global challenges nowadays are much different, and many of these structures, they have been around for decades. They're not really fit for purpose anymore, and therefore we need all the scientific evidence we can get.
Thank you, Gianmarco. So you've been excellent speakers who have been answering even live some of the questions that are in our chat. Some others haven't been replied yet. Juan Carlos Chiapa Pietra is being quite active, and he is given 3 questions, for instance. And the last one, it's diplomacy is a unified way of handling international relations between countries. Aren't we overestimating science diplomacy possibilities as an autonomous field? Anyone wants to give feedback about this question? Are we overestimating the capacities of science diplomacy to shape international relations?
Let me just respond in with one sentence here. We have been issuing a couple of weeks ago a new Commission communication on a new kind of rules-based multilateralism. And one of the key messages there is we need a new inclusive multilateralism. And this means it's not just nations. It is, it's civil society, it's business, it's of course academia that need to work together. And science diplomats, in a way, you cannot just find it in ministries. You also find them in multinational companies. They all kind of are engaged also with science and technology in one way or the other. So I think science diplomacy should be in a way much more encompassing than just thinking in a kind of nation sense.
Thank you, Gianmarco. And there is another question from Mohammad Kasim, specifically addressed to Martina. The EU has 2 young scientist organizations working on science diplomacy, one in context of biosecurity and the other one on nuclear issues. So how can we develop a single youth diplomacy network for the EU and the rest of the world?
Well, I've seen that question as well, and I interpret it in a way, should we develop a single network? And I think I'm a little bit skeptical on that. First of all, I think that there might be opportunities like joining SPIDER that could help those youth organizations already. And on the other hand, we have seen, and this was one of the big developments in the last years, that also science diplomacy is getting compartmentalized in very specific kinds of science diplomacy. And I think this also, like science itself has specialized very much, you also have people who are very specialized then in science diplomacy on very specific issues. And while the exchange between these youth groups might be interesting, I also think that they have different focus areas of their work. And that's why I'm not so sure that we need one single network. What we need is an exchange between these networks for best practice. And I think one of the big things that could be done on EU level is this kind of training mechanisms, to develop joint training mechanisms for young diplomats, regardless of which area they come from. So from that point of view, networking is okay, but I'm not sure that we need one single network.
Thank you, Martina. And actually, we have had the Global Young Academy, for instance, intervening in our S4D4C final networking meeting. That's another network, but it goes back again to some of the core messages from the S4D4C consortium is multilateralism, multi-stakeholder, and interactive spaces between all kinds of actors. I'm not sure, well, we are running slightly behind schedule, but I want to give 30 seconds to Paulo and Adam to say some final remarks before giving the floor to the next panel roundtable. Paulo?
Well, I will be very short. So I believe that the relevance of science is that it is trusted, and of course it creates trust among partners. And then of course it is a wonderful basis to start developing diplomacy. And I've been experiencing this during my life, and I do believe that it is important, and I'm very happy to recognize that Europe has made a huge effort on this, and I think this will pay off. And of course, I would like to congratulate you all by the effort that you are doing. So we at COST are continuously wanting to push forward, and we want to be part of it. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you. Adam?
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm going to close by saying we should never waste a good crisis. And the pandemic has been terrible. And you mentioned, Lorenzo, at the beginning, you know, some of the impacts that it's had on the healthcare systems, but also on people's lives, of course. But it's also created some opportunities, and that we've seen, you know, real advancements in terms of the willingness of partners to share even preliminary research results, to share IP, to develop new solutions in common. And we are starting to see a new way of doing science in the world. It's happened because people have seen that there is an urgent problem. And we need to create the same sense of urgency when we are looking at other scientific challenges, you know, particularly in the green area, the climate area, also in digital questions, so that we get the same consolidated, concentrated response to the challenges. And we are not going to do that without the support of, you know, our partners in diplomatic missions around the world, whose presence and you know, moral support and ability to open doors is absolutely essential for the role of scientists in developing those links. And you know, I just want to thank you and, you know, colleagues in diplomatic missions everywhere for the work that they're doing in order to help.
Thank you, Adam.
Science.
Your connection is having some connectivity issues. Well, let's go and check the graphic summary Javier Alonso, our graphic artist, has done of our session. Please, could you show it on the screen, technical team? Yes. So thank you, Javier, for this amazing figure, summary of this panel roundtable that starts the beginning of our closing ceremony. Martina, Paulo, Gianmarco, and Adam, it's been a real pleasure to have you with us today. And now I shall give the floor to Elke Dahl, who is going to talk about the future of, the legacy of S4D4C. Thank you all for attending and enjoy.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks, Lorenzo, and thanks to your panelists. It was really very interesting to listen to you. I enjoyed it extremely. Thanks, Adam, for the very inclusive way to look at science diplomacy, and Paulo for the announcement that he made about science diplomacy trainings. Martina, as always, like one of the key collaboration partners with SFIC. Thanks so much. So I think with those three and Gianmarco, we had really a stellar panel. And Gianmarco, thanks so much for the support that you gave throughout the conference. I think that was crucial for us as a project as well, to have the European Action Service so much on board. What I'm planning for this next panel is to bring in our advisory board. S4D4C had from the start several members in the advisory board. There were some slight shifts that we might address, also particularly with our first speaker. And these advisory board members have been kept informed, have had a critical look at our project, have supported us from time to time in a co-creation workshop or similar activities. So we have 3 of them here today that will share a little bit their impressions on the project, and in particular its legacy. And because he has a bit of a special role, I would like to start with Alexander Marquez. He's now the head of digital health and innovation at the Gesundheit Österreich GmbH. So that's an Austrian health institution, and you might ask what I'm referring to as a special position. And the reason is he was the original coordinator of the proposal of S4D4C, so the project would not exist without his writing that got rewarded by the evaluators to launch this project. And he also coordinated it for the starting phase. So our big thanks go to him, and I'm sure that he can reflect a little bit on the project also from the perspective of how it all started. He then got headhunted, and so the pleasure to coordinate fell on me. Alex, would you like to start with a little bit of your reflections on the project?
Of course, thank you, Elke. Thanks for the invitation. It's good to be here. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces, at least virtually, and a lot of familiar names. Of course, the success story of writing this was a collaborative effort, but thanks for the flowers. I don't know if that works in English, I guess it does. And you got a greater coordinator than you ever had in Elke, and I think you all know that. So it's really exciting for me to see that this, exciting and maybe even a bit emotional, that this project comes to an end. It feels strange that it ends. And I think there were a lot of things that are noteworthy. Well, first of all, of course, one always has a lot of personal memories and connections with a project like that, with a journey like that. And then also a lot of stimulating intellectual memories come to mind. So from where I'm standing now, with 2 years distance being out of the coordination, I think that the project did an enormous job in mobilizing and in structuring the discussion together with the other projects in the cluster. First of all, with the cluster itself, I think it was a very it felt like a great beginning, and it seemed to have proven very valuable all the way along, that the three projects managed to align. I remember being invited to the Inside kickoff, for instance, in Paris, and showing up there as a, in scientific terms, sort of not the greatest of men or women in the room, and being very warmly welcomed and having very stimulating discussions on the way we should tackle this, and how we were all surprised that we are suddenly a family of projects, and it all turned out very well. On the sort of mobilization side, what I also saw, of course, was the big success of the MOOC and of the various outputs, the applied policy report outputs that have been very well received, I think. And I just feel that the project has leveraged in a constructive and also critical way this whole wave of people interested in the science diplomacy topic. And this brings me to the few points I want to say sort of on a more scientific intellectual level. It has been said before by a speaker today as well, science is not neutral. We know that now more than ever in this sort of mid-COVID world. And it's, for instance, an amazingly challenging question. What do we do when science advice is conflicting and you have to deal with lack of knowledge, non-knowledge, lack of data, and you also sort of with a lot of need for coordinating efforts and very limited resources to do so. So communicating smartly and being a bit reflective about diplomacy is crucial in that sense. Another thing I wanted to discuss maybe here a bit is that it's clear, as Elke, I think you said it, science diplomacy is not always explicitly named as such. And I think Martina made the point that sometimes things are called science diplomacy without giving it much heed, that are actually, if you critically think about it, not much about science diplomacy. So it can be challenging to go advertising activities with that label. And one of the project's successes, I think, is really that it makes people aware of that. It's like stop for a moment and reflect on what you're talking about, because when you're using a term, you're structuring a field of human activity, you're structuring a societal, from resources up to what people think and talk about. So with the Madrid Declaration, also with the focus on sort of the critical discourse analytical focus that we have in the project, with the protocol that focuses on processes, I think there are really some interesting outputs that put the finger on this very aspect. So big success from where I'm standing, that the project managed to critically reflect on that. So balancing sort of riding the hype in a way, influencing the way we practice science diplomacy and reflecting on it scientifically. Always being aware that it's such a tremendously important endeavor as such if we think about global challenges. So in terms of outlook, maybe to close, a lot of things are going on, as we heard, I think on Monday from the Commission already. She mentioned the COVID-19 data platform as one new sort of science diplomacy kit out there that from where I'm standing is still keeping EU member states busy in trying to figure out among themselves how to design this and push it forward. Horizon Europe is here. So there is a couple of activities, of course, as also Adam mentioned, to structure the way research can be carried out on a global scale. And as a final thought, I think it's very interesting if we take a step back and say, well, why is science an area that lends itself to think it together with diplomacy? And I think it's really because it's something we carry out across borders. It's a human activity, it's a societal realm of activity that we carry out across borders, and itself, as such, it lends itself to be thought of in conjunction with diplomacy. And especially because we also have attached all these values to it, right? It's a bit different from just sort of trade, although you always, of course, can also think about trade and diplomacy. So with the COVID or maybe post-COVID world at some point where we will have less travel for a long time, less trade for a long time, I think that the importance of science diplomacy as such is bound to increase. So very exciting to see the way this alliance idea will take off and to see how at the EU level science diplomacy will continue to be practiced and nurtured. I hope this was not too long.
That was perfect, Alex. Well, we miss you. So both here at the Center for Social Innovation as well as in the project, trust me. amazing, thank you. I hope you're doing fine as well, and your family. It's great to see you in any case. And I hope that with the pandemic and with the health topic, we can continue also the nexus of science diplomacy and what your work entails now. And I also want you, in that sense, feel warmly invited to join the Alliance if there are any possibilities. So, as the second advisory board member that I would like to call on after Alex is Paul Arthur Berkman. He has had the opportunity to look at us here in Europe from a kind of outsider's perspective. He is a professor currently at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research in the program on negotiation at the Harvard University and the Harvard and MIT Public Dispute Program. And he's going to be the Fulbright Arctic Chair 2021-2022. Yes, and we have had Paul with us from the start, and I think he can also give a little bit these reflections from the perspective of the US, how this development of the European science diplomacy community has been looking for you.
Thank you, Elke, and congratulations to S4D4C, as well as INSIDE and ELCID. And certainly thank you to the European Commission for their leadership in bringing science diplomacy into a more global discussion. My comments are at two levels. One is at the level of the EU and the legacy of the S4D4C project and the continuing support for the European Science Diplomacy Alliance. And the second level of discussion is to next generation science diplomats, old and young. It's clear from the world we live in, with the view of the pandemic, that we are a globally interconnected civilization. The challenges are on a planetary scale. The risks that we face are the same risks we faced last century in terms of nationalism, the concept of world wars. And as the Secretary General of the United Nations indicated, the pandemic is an experience where we are living at a time when we have a common interest at local to global scales in terms of our survival, unlike any period since the Second World War. And so, with kudos to S4D4C project, and perhaps the elegance is in the simplicity, there is an infographic on the S4D4C page, and it starts in 2022. And it looks at the world 2 centuries in the future, and it asks, how did we get there? And this is an engineering exercise. It imagines the different stakeholders, the different types of inputs to create a world that is resilient, that is stable, that is peaceful in the face of change. In the last century, from the time it was the Spanish flu to the present, the world has gone from 2 billion people to 8 billion people this century. The dynamics of the world at thinking at local to global scales involve not just nations or international, they now involve subnational. So cities, the C40 have met in Copenhagen before the pandemic, for example, to think about climate, because cities have capacity to operate on a global scale as well. And so the challenge, in a sense, is to create the dynamic that we as a civilization will grow into the future. And if we think about the future, I mean, just in terms of a touch point, the young scientists that are alive today, many of them will be alive in the 22nd century. And so the moment that we're living through in terms of the pandemic will inform. And the context of science diplomacy and the leadership that is being provided by the European Commission and Europe, and with the many countries and partners that are involved, is something that is relevant on a planetary scale. The individuals, each of us, has the opportunity to act as science diplomats. It's not a matter of being anointed with some magical position in an institution. It comes from the heart. It comes from the imagination. And to this extent, I was truly delighted to see the progress that was contributed by S4D4C this week. You had participants from around the world who enthusiastically embraced and talked about science diplomacy from many different perspectives. And in this sense, science itself is international, it's interdisciplinary, and it's inclusive. And if we think about how to build a globally interconnected civilization, the inclusion is the biggest challenge. What are the forces in the world that exist that enable us to be inclusive across time? And science is certainly one of them. And the emphasis on science diplomacy as an idea, as a concept, is a sense hope. And so to that extent, science diplomacy is a language of hope. It empowers the generations to come with capacity, with skills, with methods, and with theory to operate in a world of change. And to that extent, my congratulations to S4D4C, as well as INSIDE, as well as LCID, and especially to the European Union for your leadership, which is recognized and appreciated around the world.
Thank you, Paul. We knew why we would invite the advisory board members because they are very eloquently saying the things that we could not frame better for the conclusion of this week. After also being a little bit tired of having all these organizational issues to be dealing with to get this on stage. Thank you, Paul, very much. And I have a third advisory board member, Thomas König, senior scientist at the Institute for Advanced Studies here in Austria as well. Thomas, I invite you warmly.
Well, thank you, Elke. Thank you, everyone, for having the opportunity being part of this project and for sharing some comments at the end of a long and very fascinating conference. And what a journey it has been. I still remember sitting with the project team in the first meeting at the Diplomatische Akademie in Vienna, and I was very interested in what this project is all about, but I was not really sure I understood what the overall aim was. And in particular, I remember thinking that this is really an awkward acronym for this project, S4D4C. Never going to catch up on, and I will never remember the right sequence of letters, but I was wrong. It did catch on, and I think this is only a synonym for the success of this project more generally. A hugely successful collaboration between academics, policymakers, and diplomats. So congratulations at this point. What has been achieved in my role as an advisor, I was involved at certain points in time, not over the entire stretch of the project. But I also remember at one point in the midway through, two things that I think I even wrote down back then for myself. The first one was at one of these meetings, I witnessed a real excitement that this team was creating. And with excitement, I mean, you know, usually academics, diplomats, politicians, very different type of people. But by profession, they're all skeptical, reserved, maybe sometimes even cynical. But in these meetings, there was a real passion. And the second thing that I realized, and I think that's also very important, is what I would call the intellectual honesty with which the subject matter was treated. Science diplomacy is quite an intricate matter, to say the least. And I just want to give you one example that I personally found extremely interesting. I think it was mentioned already by Alex before. There was the work on the historical trajectory of the science diplomacy discourse, which then led to a very good and published in a very distinguished journal also, article by Tim Flink and Charlotte Rungius. But also on the more policy-oriented side, the Madrid Declaration, I think, which you all know by heart by now. So this final conference too is a perfect summary of how the breadth and the depth of what has been achieved over the past 4 years can be seen. And so if we talk about legacy, I think it has already been stressed by the speakers before that we live in a time when a distinct global regime, globalization, or however we want to call it, is coming to an end in a way. And there are 3 emerging superblocks who pursue their own interests more blatantly and more rigorously than we have witnessed over the past 30 years. But we also live in a time when challenges have become truly global, a pandemic, a lifestyle that substantially alters the basic condition under which humans can prosper. And how can science diplomacy play a role here? We need bridges and we need forums to identify common ground. It has been mentioned the alliance before, and I think alliance in a more general term is really key. And I think this project has been doing exactly this. It brings together science and diplomacy. Also in the way you set up the project, your material is for everyone to use. And that's in the spirit under which we need to move on. Personally, also one of the most important aspects that I also work on and that I think highly fascinating the way you dealt with it. And you I think are also covering new ground here is the role tackling or addressing the role of open science with big letters, capitals, open science, freely circulating knowledge, crossing the boundaries. So to summarize, S4D4C, I can say it in the right sequence, S4D4C came at the right time, a little bit before everyone talked about science diplomacy actually. And as it is now ending, I think it's hitting a nerve. So the breadth and the depth of your outcomes, academically as well as in terms of training material and the policy advice, provides a great starting point. And now it's up to us to make use of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Also, yeah, let's continue the collaboration, also in the form of the Alliance. There is a warm interest to do so. With this, yeah, that was our closing roundtable. I think that's how we planned it, kind of like 3 statements. If there are some questions, of course, we could take them, but in the sake of time and to let you go all from these 5 days, I would like to thank our advisory board members warmly, and we'll be in touch for the conclusions afterwards. We still have 1 month, and we'll wind everything down and start the Alliance. I would now invite, oops, that was too fast. I would now invite my 2 colleagues, Maddalena Lamura and Salome Kofla, to announce who has won this wonderful cups. Yeah, so the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, we are proud that we can announce the 2 winners we already mentioned at the start. Yes, exactly. So on Monday, you got to hear that we want to have to engage our participants in the conference in various ways. And so we are happy to announce the most avid networker, which is the person who scheduled the most bilateral meetings, and it is Arturo Castro Nava. Congratulations, you win this beautiful cup. She likes it so much. She took it with her. And then we have a second winner who is the most active tweeter with our conference hashtag 21, and this is the Twitter handle SDG Bergen, which corresponds to the description of the Science Diplomacy Initiative at the University of Bergen in Norway. So congratulations to you as well.
Perfect. So we will send the cup to Norway, and to Arturo, we are going to track you down. No worries. And maybe, yeah. Maybe just for everyone to see as well. Yeah, I had you on a slide. I'm not sure, you will not see that at the moment, I think. There it is. Yes, so if you recognize yourself, that's the amazing mark that you're going to win. So we had in these weeks 1,159 registrations. 749 people have attended the event. 21 meetings have been scheduled, more than 30 sessions have happened, more than 100 speakers have spoken. I think it has been a tremendous success and we're very proud of, and we're going to celebrate this meeting. We want to give you a few thanks because obviously this project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program under grant agreement number 770342, sorry. Well, it's the standard disclaimer. And it has been an amazing ride and we're very thankful. I'm handing over briefly to my colleague Anna for some more thanks.
Thank you, Elke. Thank you. It's important also to say that we would really like to thank the Commission, the European Commission, with all their stakeholders, the DGs, the GRC, etc., and also the external service. They were supporting us for many, many months. They were listening to us. They were taking into account our policy briefs and our outputs. And we really, really want to thank all that team and people there supporting us. I don't want to mention names, but few of them were really behind us, and it was a very important part of the job.
Yeah, we want to thank also the co-organizers. We have had help through several stakeholders that put forward proposals. We could not take everyone. That was very unfortunate. You can believe there was an independent evaluation committee and we were very sad sometimes. But at the end, we had 6 co-organizers for 6 parallel sessions, and we would like to really thank them very much, and also their speakers.
Yes, and also we would really want to say thank you, a big thank you to the speakers and the panelists. More than 100 people participated in this meeting, and it was not always easy. We are all fed up of Zooms and webinars, and for us it was really, really important to have them available and sharing their knowledge and their experience. So thank you for them.
And not only for the conference, but for the whole past 3 years, we have been in touch with a multitude of institutions, individuals, civil society, businesses, foundations, politicians, policymakers, administrators, etc., representatives of member states. We're going to leave this all a little bit in general because we would not be able to mention the multitude of stakeholders that have contributed by giving us opportunities for interviews, for speaking at their events. They have contributed to our case studies. They have been co-creating the results together with us in co-creation workshops, in focus groups, and they have been reviewing and using our work. So a big thanks to everyone.
I want to say thank you also especially to the trainees and those that read and were appreciating our outputs. We have the impression, and we are really glad for that, to been inspiring for so many young and not so young scientists and diplomats and policymakers. So thank you for them to attend our courses and to be in contact with us.
And we also want to thank in particular all our project partners. Basically, they have shared 3 years of their lives with us. So that was also an emotional and personal collaboration. I sometimes say there can be worse things that happen than to lose a project and not be successful, namely to win a project that you have to spend 3 years of your life with and that you don't like. So this was one that we obviously all liked. I hope so. At least I did. Yeah, thanks to all the project partners and the team. In particular,
Yes, in particular, we want to say thank you to TWAS, the World Academy of Science, to Peter, to Sena, to Sheila, that is not anymore there, and to Marga, all the people that help us from there. Thank you so, so much.
Then we would like to thank the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. They actively supported our training activities. They organized an event here in Vienna and also organized this Austrian community together with us. They increased our understanding of the diplomatic world. So Susanne, Maximilian, great to see you. And thanks a lot for the support to mobilize the diplomatic world for us globally and here in Austria.
We would also like to say thank you to the German Center for Higher Education, Research and Science Studies. They were really leading the theoretical and conceptual work package and being critically reflecting about the discourse of science diplomacy and having a new and promising theory. Charlotte and Tim, I think Tim left us, but thank you.
Yes, indeed. I think I received a picture of Tim with his 2 children that he is on duty with at the moment. But let me continue then to thank the Charles University. As DZHW was leading the theoretical work package, Charles University was instrumental and leading the empirical work package. So the case studies, the transversal analysis thereof, there's Mitchell, you see, hi. They were pushing us to address the COVID-19 crisis in a policy brief. The colleagues Eliška and Eliška, you see them here at the moment. And they were always ready to support us with their thoughtful presentations and insights into the case studies. Thank you very much.
We want also to say thank you to the University of Twente. Evert, Sana, Stefan, Gonzalo, thank you so much for developing the governance framework, contributing to many of the case studies and pushing the careful analysis in relation to governance. Thank you so much.
Then thank you, Evert and Stefan. And we have our partners in Germany, DLR. They have been leading the work on the training and capacity building activities. And Nadia was also our impact officer and in charge of measuring and recording the impacts. And Maria, cheers to you as well. Thank you for working on with the science policy stakeholders in Germany. And thank you for providing all those amazing training outputs to our audience.
And a special thank you to Pauline from the University of Lille. She was really contributing to the case studies and linking us to the world of la francophonie en diplomatie scientifique. Merci, Pauline.
Thank you. And Theodore as well, you see you here, you contributed a lot to the conference workshop, and we continue with the University of Sheffield. They made us, they ensured that we stayed on track by leading the quality assurance work package. Helen, nice to see you there. Hi. And pushing us, contributing to the case study work as well. So several of your colleagues, or previous colleagues in Sheffield, have developed science advice case studies and so on. And it was always great to follow your guidance, Helen, on improving our deliverables and reports.
And of course, we have to say thank you to the big team of CETESAI, especially to you, Elke. I have flowers for you here from Madrid. Thank you for everything. I mean, you were really strong, pushing, innovative, and rigorous all these 3 years and 4 months. And also to your team, to Mada, to Salome, to Lorian. It was really a pleasure, and we will really miss you, I have to say. So thank you.
Thank you. We will continue collaborating, and FECIT was a key partner in the project. So now it's on me to give all the compliments back. You have really been key in developing this massive open online course. and the outreach in the policy world, like pushing us to be the most ambitious. Probably the most ambitious conference dedicated to science diplomacy ever. At least that's how it feels to me, because 5 days was simply quite crazy. And that's thanks to you. So applause. And it was great working with you also from the spirit.
Okay, and finally, I would really like to mention the organization team. This 5 days week was really an important task for us, really crazy, working.
I think she wants to thank
hours, 7, and Elke, Mada, Salome, Izaskun, Fernando, who is not here, and Lorenzo were behind all this work that you are seeing here. But really, we want to say thank you to someone, and I think she knows who is it. It's Lorean Plumans. She was really magnificent. She really deserves the big applause for this week, and I really want to say thank you, Lorean. Thank you, because without you, this couldn't be possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's really unexpected. I'm a bit emotional now. Thank you. It was really, really great to work with all of you and the team at FACIT and the whole S4D4C team and the great trainees and the great coordinator. So thank you. I'm very surprised. I'm very pleased. Thank you very much. It was great. And S4D4C is the first project I really get to work on, and that's a great start, I think. So thank you, everyone. And thank you to all the attendees as well.
And I feel to add 2 points. One, Lorean is not only a very good organizer, she's also impeccable analytical. So she contributed to our transversal analysis and everything. So don't mistake this for someone who does amazing organization. And secondly, I probably just have to add that we have had a very rigorous COVID-19 regime here. So don't be shocked about those 4 people in one screen. We have tested every day in the morning, and we were wearing masks outside of this one room that is big enough for 4 people. So don't worry about us. We are staying healthy, and do the same. Stay healthy for you too. And with that, I think I have just to make a few more announcements. Or Anna, what are your final words from the thank you?
No, I would just say, I think that we in FACIT were super proud of being part of this consortium. It changed a little bit our lives, and we want to continue to work hand in hand with all of you. So long life to the Alliance, and we will meet soon if COVID pandemic permits. So hopefully we will meet.
And just also to conclude it, in fact, I want to mention that in the next 2 weeks, we're planning to have an event documentation online. We are expecting recordings of the plenary sessions. So just to recall as well, the parallel sessions have not been recorded, but the plenary sessions have been. We're going to put that online. We're putting online Javier's amazing graphic recording. The first 3 days are already on our website, and we're going to complement that now continuously in the next days and weeks with some conclusions. This will all become available in the spirit of the project of like for you to use and reuse. With that, I think we are just in time. So I think also I can congratulate us all for the time management, and I'm sure that we will also conclude the project, which will end on the 30th of April with an equally sharp time management and quality management and impact management and all those ambitions that we have announced and promised to the community to be continuing to be in touch. With that, I see some applauses in the chat, and I thank you very much. Also, the approximately 100 people that were staying with us for the 5 days and until now. And I think we can conclude the meeting. Woo!
Bye.
Stay healthy.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
I think you have to unmute because